Few names in history spark awe like Alexander. Even in his lifetime, he was whispered about as more than mortal, a man who could reshape the world before he turned 30. But every legend has a beginning, and Alexander's story starts in Pella, the ancient capital of Macedonia, in 356 BCE. Born to King Philip II and Queen Olympias, Alexander entered a world of ambition, intrigue, and blood. From the very start, destiny seemed to follow him, though it would take courage, brilliance, and ruthless determination to claim it. Alexander's early life was far from ordinary. Philip II had forged Macedonia into a powerful kingdom through war, diplomacy, and sheer force of will. Olympias, Alexander's mother, was equally formidable, steeped in the mysticism and ambition of Epirus, a neighboring kingdom. From her, Alexander inherited a sense of divine purpose. She whispered that he was descended from Achilles and Zeus himself. This mixture of politics, religion, and mythology created a young man who would grow up believing he was not just a prince, but destined for greatness. Even as a child, Alexander displayed extraordinary intelligence, curiosity, and fearlessness. Tales abound of his daring exploits, taming wild horses, studying Greek philosophy, memorizing texts, and practicing military strategy. He was relentless, disciplined, and insatiably curious about the world. But Alexander was also shaped by a court rife with intrigue. The Macedonian palace was a place where ambition could kill. His father's court was a crucible, and Alexander had to navigate it with cunning as well as strength. Early exposure to these dynamics taught him lessons in loyalty, betrayal, and the art of seizing power. At the same time, Macedonia itself was a kingdom on the rise. Philip II had transformed it from a peripheral, quarrelsome region into a centralized power with a professional army, innovative tactics, and a formidable phalanx. Alexander grew up watching these transformations firsthand, learning the mechanics of warfare and governance before he even rode a horse into battle. He saw the link between vision and execution, understanding that leadership required intellect, courage, and decisiveness. His father's ambitions became his own, but Alexander wanted more than Macedonia. He wanted the world. Alexander's education played a pivotal role in shaping the man he would become. At the age of 13, he was tutored by Aristotle, one of the greatest minds of the ancient world. Under Aristotle, Alexander learned philosophy, science, literature, and medicine. But more than facts and theories, Aristotle instilled in him a worldview, the power of knowledge, the importance of curiosity, and the belief that the world was something to be explored, conquered, and understood. Alexander's mind became a weapon as sharp as the sword he would later wield. From taming his horse, Bucephalus at the age of 12, to leading troops in minor campaigns during his father's campaigns, Alexander's early life combined practical experience with visionary thinking. He learned that courage alone was not enough. Strategy, foresight, and charisma were equally vital. His actions often inspired those around him. Soldiers and companions came to trust that Alexander would not ask of them anything he would not do himself. This was the beginning of his ability to command loyalty, a trait that would define his empire-building decades later. Alexander's upbringing also exposed him to the darker side of ambition. Court intrigue, assassinations, and betrayals were constant realities. His father Philip had survived multiple plots, and Alexander himself narrowly escaped attempts on his life. These experiences hardened him, taught him caution, and sharpened his instinct for preemptive action. He learned that power was not simply inherited, it had to be claimed, defended, and sometimes stolen. The lessons of fear and vigilance stayed with him for life. By the time he reached adolescence, Alexander had already begun to form a vision far beyond Macedonia. He studied the great heroes of Greek legend, imagining himself not merely as a prince or general, but as a figure who could reshape the known world. His imagination was matched by ambition, courage, and intellect, a rare combination that marked him from every other noble of his generation. He was not content to inherit his father's accomplishments. He sought to surpass them, to leave a mark that would echo for centuries. Alexander's early relationships also played a role in his rise. He forged bonds with companions and future generals during his youth, men who would remain loyal throughout campaigns spanning thousands of miles. His friendships, rivalries, and alliances taught him negotiation, loyalty, and the delicate balance between trust and power. He understood that conquest required both strength of arms and the ability to inspire loyalty in those around him. By the time Philip II was assassinated in 336 BCE, Alexander was ready. At just 20 years old, he inherited a kingdom that was powerful but fragile, a throne that could be challenged at any moment. But unlike many young rulers, Alexander was not intimidated by the scale of his task. The years of education, training, and exposure to court politics had forged a man who was prepared to act decisively, with the audacity and vision that would define his era. Alexander's birth and early life were a crucible in which his destiny was forged. The combination of royal lineage, rigorous education, battlefield experience, and exposure to intrigue produced a young man who believed he was capable of conquering the world. These formative years set the stage for a life defined by audacity, brilliance, and ambition. They explain why, even at a young age, Alexander carried himself with the confidence, vision, and relentless drive that would allow him to reshape history. In 343 BCE, when Alexander was just 13 years old, his father, King Philip II, made a decision that would shape the course of history. He appointed Aristotle, the greatest philosopher of his time, to educate his son. It was more than a simple schooling arrangement. It was an investment in the mind of a future king who would inherit one of the most powerful kingdoms in Greece. Aristotle's influence on Alexander cannot be overstated. It shaped not only his intellect, but also his understanding of leadership, ethics, science, and the world beyond Macedonia. Aristotle was not merely a teacher of philosophy. He was a polymath who had studied everything from biology and politics to poetry and ethics. Under his guidance, Alexander was introduced to the works of Homer, the strategies of Greek historians, and the complexities of natural science. Aristotle encouraged curiosity, analysis, and observation. He insisted that knowledge was a tool, a way to understand the world, and, in Alexander's case, a way to master it. Lessons were not abstract. Alexander learned to think critically, to anticipate outcomes, and to see connections between knowledge and power. Homer's epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, had a particularly profound influence. Alexander reportedly kept a copy of the Iliad under his pillow and carried it with him on campaigns. The tales of Achilles, heroism, honor, and glory became a personal template for his ambition. Aristotle nurtured this admiration, teaching Alexander to see himself as a continuation of these heroic traditions. He was not merely to inherit a kingdom. He was to shape it, to achieve feats worthy of legends, and to emulate the courage and intellect of the heroes he studied. But Aristotle's lessons were not confined to texts. He exposed Alexander to real-world applications of philosophy. Discussions about ethics, politics, and governance were paired with observations of Macedonian administration and court intrigue. Alexander learned how decisions could have consequences for loyalty, stability, and the perception of power. He began to understand that leadership required a combination of wisdom, calculation, and the ability to inspire both fear and devotion. These lessons would become critical when he assumed the throne at just 20 years old. Alexander's scientific education was equally practical. Aristotle encouraged him to study geography, natural history, and medicine. These subjects were not purely academic. They prepared Alexander to confront the unknown as he would later march across Asia. Understanding terrain, climate, and human behavior would give him strategic advantages in campaigns that spanned thousands of miles. His observations of animals, plants, and ecosystems informed his ability to manage supplies, anticipate environmental challenges, and navigate the diverse territories he would encounter. Aristotle also taught Alexander about politics and governance, emphasizing the importance of law, alliances, and diplomacy. These lessons were critical in Macedonia, a kingdom surrounded by potentially hostile Greek city-states and wary neighbors. Alexander learned that raw power alone was insufficient. Intelligence, strategy, and perception mattered as much as courage on the battlefield. By combining these skills, he could maintain control over a complex and expansive empire, a lesson he would apply repeatedly as he expanded into Persia, Egypt, and beyond. The moral lessons were equally important. Aristotle taught Alexander about virtue, ethics, and justice, though Alexander's interpretation of these principles would later diverge in his relentless pursuit of conquest. Nevertheless, Aristotle instilled a belief in personal excellence and the idea that a leader must be both courageous and wise. The balance between intellect and action became a hallmark of Alexander's style, allowing him to make swift decisions while considering the broader implications of his campaigns. Beyond academics, Aristotle nurtured Alexander's ambition. He recognized the prince's potential for greatness and challenged him intellectually, pushing him to question assumptions and envision possibilities. Alexander's natural curiosity and drive were sharpened under Aristotle's mentorship, transforming a gifted young man into a visionary capable of imagining an empire that stretched from Greece to the edges of India. Their relationship was also personal. Alexander reportedly respected Aristotle deeply, but he was never blind to the practical realities of leadership. He absorbed what was useful and applied it decisively, blending theory with action. The combination of philosophical training, admiration for heroic precedent, and exposure to real-world strategy created a unique mind, one capable of both intellectual innovation and ruthless execution. By the time Alexander returned to Macedon to assume the throne in 336 BCE, he was not merely a prince, he was a trained strategist, philosopher, king in the making. The lessons from Aristotle provided him with the mental tools to plan campaigns, inspire loyalty, and conceptualize the conquest of the known world. They gave him a framework to navigate the moral, strategic, and political challenges that would define his reign. In retrospect, Aristotle's mentorship was not just about education, it was about preparation for destiny. Alexander's intellect, strategic genius, and ambition were honed under the guidance of one of history's greatest thinkers, creating a ruler capable of achieving feats that no one else had imagined. The blending of philosophy, science, and heroism laid the foundation for an empire that would stretch across continents, influence countless generations, and immortalize Alexander in the annals of history. 336 BCE marked a turning point in the history of Macedonia and the ancient world. King Philip II, the architect of Macedonian power, was assassinated during the celebration of his daughter's wedding in Aegae. His death plunged the kingdom into uncertainty and fear. Philip had transformed Macedonia into a formidable military and political force, but his assassination left a fragile throne and a volatile court. For Alexander, then only 20 years old, It was a moment that demanded both courage and ruthless decisiveness. Philip's murder was shocking, but the court was already a web of intrigue and rivalry. Ambitious nobles, discontented generals, and enemies from rival states watched with keen interest. The assassin, Pausanias, had his own motives rooted in personal grievances, but the chaos it unleashed provided opportunities for those with vision, strategy, and audacity. Alexander recognized that the throne would not simply be inherited. It had to be seized and defended immediately. Hesitation could have led to civil war, rival claimants, or even assassination attempts on himself. Alexander moved swiftly. He consolidated power by eliminating rivals, securing loyalty from key military commanders, and projecting confidence that belied his youth. Within days, he demonstrated that he was no naive prince, but a calculated leader capable of decisive action. Macedonian soldiers, who had been loyal to Philip, were now presented with a young king who embodied the very values his father had cultivated: courage, discipline, and ambition. His early actions reassured allies and intimidated potential enemies. Securing the throne also meant confronting internal dissent. Many Greek city-states viewed Macedonia's power with suspicion and were uncertain how to respond to Philip's death. Alexander had to project strength, not just within Macedonia, but across Greece. He swiftly crushed uprisings and rebellious factions, demonstrating that Macedonia would remain united under his leadership. This early consolidation was critical. It prevented fragmentation at a time when any sign of weakness could have invited foreign intervention. Alexander also inherited a vast, well-trained army. Philip had modernized Macedon's military, creating a professional, disciplined force equipped with the innovative sarissa, a 18-foot-long spear, and a formidable phalanx. Alexander understood that these forces were both a tool of conquest and a symbol of legitimacy. By demonstrating mastery over his army, he reassured generals and soldiers alike that he was capable of leading them not only in defense of the kingdom, but also in the ambitious campaigns he envisioned beyond Greece. His rise to power was not only a military challenge, but also a political balancing act. Macedonia was surrounded by rival states, some eager to exploit Philip's death. Alexander employed diplomacy, strategic marriages, and displays of force to maintain alliances and neutralize potential threats. His ability to combine political savvy with military prowess set him apart from other young rulers. He learned early that conquest required more than strength. It required vision, perception, and manipulation of both fear and respect. The death of Philip also exposed Alexander to betrayal on a deeply personal level. The court was filled with those who had plotted against his father or who might have coveted power for themselves. Alexander's mother, Olympias, played a critical role during this period, ensuring that her son's claim was solidified and that rival factions were neutralized. The combination of familial support, personal courage, and decisive action allowed Alexander to navigate one of the most dangerous transitions of power in ancient history. Within a few months, Alexander had stabilized Macedonia and asserted its dominance over the Greek city-states. He demonstrated that he was not merely his father's heir, but a ruler capable of independent strategy and vision. The young king's ability to act decisively under pressure foreshadowed the audacity that would define his conquests. It was during this time that Alexander began to articulate his grander ambitions, not just to defend Macedonia, but to fulfill a destiny that would carry him across continents and into the pages of history. Alexander's rise to the throne also revealed his understanding of psychology and perception. By moving quickly and decisively, he created an image of invincibility. Nobles, generals, and soldiers recognized that hesitation or resistance would be met with both cunning and force. He leveraged this perception to unify the kingdom and prepare for the campaigns that would follow, transforming what could have been a period of vulnerability into a demonstration of leadership and vision. The assassination of Philip II was both a tragedy and an opportunity. For Alexander, it was the catalyst that propelled him from prince to king, from heir to conqueror. It tested his courage, strategic acumen, and ability to command loyalty under the most precarious circumstances. His actions during this critical period revealed a combination of intellect, boldness, and ruthlessness that would define his reign. By the end of 336 BCE, Macedonia was firmly under Alexander's control, and the stage was set for the campaigns that would forever alter the known world. Alexander's rise was not simply about inheriting a throne. It was about seizing destiny. The events following Philip's death demonstrated his capacity to act decisively, inspire loyalty, and navigate treachery. These formative experiences taught lessons in leadership, strategy, and human nature that would inform every decision he made as he embarked on a journey to conquer empires, face betrayal, and leave a legacy unparalleled in history. After ascending to the throne in 336 BCE, Alexander faced an immediate and formidable challenge: Greece itself. While Macedonia had grown powerful under Philip II, many Greek city-states, Athens, Thebes, and others, remained resentful of Macedonian dominance. The sudden death of Philip presented an opening for rebellion, and within weeks, uprisings ignited across the region. Alexander understood that failure to act decisively could fracture his kingdom before his grand ambitions even began. He had to unite Greece, not merely through diplomacy, but through displays of power that would leave no doubt about who ruled. Thebes, a city known for its stubborn defiance and history of resistance, became the first major test. In 335 BCE, Theban leaders encouraged other Greek states to rise against Macedonia, hoping to exploit the young king's inexperience. Alexander moved quickly, assembling a disciplined army and marching into central Greece. The speed and decisiveness of his response shocked his enemies. He didn't negotiate or hesitate. He intended to make an example that would deter any future revolts. The siege of Thebes was both brutal and calculated. Alexander's forces surrounded the city, cutting off supplies and using siege engines to breach its walls. When resistance persisted, he allowed no mercy. Thousands of Thebans were killed, and the city was largely destroyed. Temples, houses, and public buildings were burned or razed to the ground. Survivors were enslaved, and Thebes would not rise again as a threat to Macedonian authority. This ruthless display sent a clear message to every city-state in Greece. Rebellion would be met with total and uncompromising force. Alexander's strategy combined fear with political pragmatism. While Thebes suffered devastation, other cities were given a choice: submission and loyalty, or destruction. Many Greek states quickly recognized the futility of resistance and chose allegiance over annihilation. Alexander skillfully leveraged this perception of invincibility, using terror as a tool to consolidate power without having to fight every city individually. By combining calculated brutality with the strategic promise of mercy for compliance, he achieved a level of control that even seasoned rulers would envy. This unification was more than just military. Alexander positioned himself as the legitimate ruler of Greece, not merely as Philip's heir. He convened the Corinthian League, a federation of Greek states, and presented himself as the leader for a common cause: the conquest of Persia. By framing his leadership as a unifying mission with a higher purpose, he appealed to Greek pride and ambition, transforming potential resistance into voluntary cooperation. His charisma, strategic vision, and ability to inspire loyalty were as important as the army he commanded. Alexander's approach also demonstrated his understanding of psychology and leadership. He knew that fear could compel obedience, but respect and inspiration ensured loyalty. Soldiers, generals, and city-states alike recognized that Alexander's power was not just in numbers or weapons, it was in his decisiveness, his vision, and his willingness to act where others hesitated. This combination of fear and admiration created an aura of inevitability around him, making rebellion seem both dangerous and pointless. The swift and brutal suppression of Greek uprisings solidified Alexander's reputation as a leader who would not tolerate defiance. It also allowed him to refocus attention on the Persian Empire, which had long been the dream of his father and now became Alexander's personal mission. By eliminating threats at home first, he ensured that his campaigns abroad would not be undermined by instability in Greece. This ability to manage both domestic and external challenges simultaneously demonstrated strategic brilliance at an early stage in his reign. Alexander's actions during this period also had a transformative effect on Macedonia itself. The army, seasoned by campaigns under Philip, now operated under a leader with unmatched charisma and tactical acumen. Soldiers came to trust that Alexander would lead them from the front, sharing in danger and hardship. This loyalty would become a defining feature of his campaigns, enabling him to undertake seemingly impossible feats in foreign lands far from home. While the destruction of Thebes is often remembered for its cruelty, it also served a strategic purpose that few rulers understood as effectively as Alexander. By removing a rebellious city from the equation, he secured the stability of Greece and demonstrated the consequences of defiance. The combination of calculated violence and diplomatic framing made Alexander not just a king, but a symbol of absolute authority, one whose word and will were law. The consolidation of Greece also had cultural implications. Alexander positioned himself as a unifier of Hellenic states, emphasizing shared heritage, language, and ambition. This cultural framing allowed him to rally troops and allies under the banner of a common cause, the campaign against Persia. It was an early example of how Alexander combined military strategy with psychological and cultural insight, ensuring that his conquests would resonate not only through force, but also through shared identity and purpose. By the end of 335 BCE, rebellion had been crushed, loyalty secured, and the foundation laid for Alexander's unprecedented campaigns. Greece was united not merely by treaties or alliances, but by the clear demonstration of Alexander's ability to command, punish, and inspire. The combination of fire and fear, of ruthless action and strategic vision, ensured that no city-state would dare challenge his authority again. In doing so, Alexander had proven that he was more than a young king. He was a leader capable of shaping history, prepared to conquer the world beyond Macedonia. With Greece firmly under his control by 334 BCE, Alexander turned his eyes eastward. The Persian Empire, a vast and wealthy dominion stretching from the Aegean to the Indus, represented both a challenge and an opportunity. To Alexander, it was more than a military target. It was the realization of a lifelong ambition to surpass the achievements of his ancestors and carve his name into eternity. Crossing into Asia marked the beginning of a campaign that would redefine the known world, blending strategy, courage, and ambition on an unprecedented scale. Alexander's army, numbering around 35,000 troops, crossed the Hellespont in Asia Minor, setting foot on Persian soil for the first time. The men understood the enormity of the journey. They were leaving familiar lands, facing enemies whose empire had resisted conquest for centuries, and entering a realm of unknown cultures, landscapes, and warfare tactics. Yet under Alexander's leadership, fear transformed into determination. His charisma and relentless energy inspired soldiers to embrace the impossible, to believe that their actions could shape the destiny of empires. The Persian Empire was not a monolith, but a complex network of satrapies, fortified cities, and professional armies. Darius III, the reigning Persian king, was cautious but confident. To him, Alexander was a regional upstart, a young king with ambition, but untested in true imperial warfare. But Alexander's brilliance lay in his ability to leverage speed, surprise, and strategy. He avoided predictable tactics and sought to outmaneuver larger forces with intelligence and decisive action. The first major confrontation occurred at the Battle of the Granicus River in 334 BCE. Alexander faced a coalition of Persian satraps and local forces who had gathered to halt his advance. The river crossing itself was perilous. Troops had to move through water under enemy attack. Alexander led from the front, a hallmark of his leadership style, inspiring soldiers to push forward despite overwhelming risk. His tactical genius, placing the strongest units at decisive points, exploiting weaknesses, and maintaining cohesion under fire, secured a stunning victory. The Persian satraps were defeated, their forces scattered, and Alexander's reputation as an unstoppable force began to grow. Victory at Granicus was more than a battlefield success. It was a psychological blow to the Persian Empire. Local populations, who had been under Persian control for generations, began to question the empire's invincibility. Alexander's approach combined not only military might, but also shrewd diplomacy. He often spared cities that submitted peacefully, incorporating local elites into his administration. This strategy reduced resistance, stabilized newly conquered regions, and allowed him to project power without overstretching his forces. Following Granicus, Alexander continued his march through Asia Minor, liberating Greek cities under Persian control and spreading his influence. Each victory reinforced the image of Alexander not merely as a conqueror, but as a liberator, a leader who could challenge an empire while respecting local traditions and elites. His use of propaganda, symbolism, and calculated clemency made him an almost mythic figure in the eyes of both soldiers and civilians. Alexander's vision was not limited to military conquest. He sought to integrate cultures, blending Greek and Persian traditions to create a unified empire. From early campaigns, he encouraged marriages between Macedonians and local populations, adopted Persian dress and customs when politically advantageous, and promoted the idea that loyalty to Alexander transcended ethnicity or origin. This approach demonstrated a level of strategic sophistication far beyond his years, ensuring that his conquests were not merely temporary subjugations, but foundations for a lasting legacy. As he advanced further into Persian territory, Alexander faced increasingly formidable challenges: fortified cities, unfamiliar terrain, and the logistics of sustaining a long campaign across vast distances. His leadership style became crucial. Soldiers witnessed his personal courage, often placing himself at the most dangerous points of battle. This fearless approach inspired loyalty and bravery, convincing men to endure hardship, scarcity, and danger in pursuit of victory. Alexander's ability to lead by example transformed the Macedonian army into a machine of unparalleled effectiveness and morale. The psychological impact on both allies and enemies was profound. In cities that surrendered, Alexander displayed magnanimity. In those that resisted, he displayed ruthless efficiency. This combination created an aura of inevitability around his advance, discouraging rebellion and encouraging voluntary submission. It also enhanced his legend, portraying him not just as a king or general, but as a figure of destiny, a man whose victories seemed preordained. The march into Persia was also a test of vision. Alexander faced questions not only of tactics, but of strategy and governance. He had to anticipate Persian counterattacks, manage diverse populations, and maintain supply lines over unfamiliar and often hostile terrain. Every decision, from how to besiege a city to how to incorporate local elites, reflected a mind capable of seeing the big picture while managing minute details. His campaigns demonstrated that conquest was as much about psychology, administration, and culture as it was about battlefield prowess. By the end of 334 BCE, Alexander had crossed the Hellespont, defeated Persian forces at Granicus, and begun a relentless advance into the heart of the empire. He had transformed from a young Macedonian king into a commander whose ambition, intellect, and courage would define an era. His dream of conquering the known world had begun, setting in motion a series of events that would reshape the geopolitical landscape, challenge civilizations, and create legends that endure to this day. In May 334 BCE, Alexander faced the first true test of his ambition, the Battle of the Granicus River. Crossing into Asia Minor, he encountered a coalition of Persian satraps and local forces determined to halt his advance. For many soldiers, this was their first encounter with the vast resources and disciplined armies of the Persian Empire. For Alexander, it was a chance to prove that he was more than a young king, that he could lead men to victory against an empire many considered invincible. The Granicus River itself presented both strategic challenges and opportunities. Alexander's army numbered roughly 35,000 men, a mix of Macedonian phalanx infantry, cavalry, and elite companions. Opposing them were Persian forces, estimated at a similar size, including cavalry and Greek mercenaries who had been recruited to defend the satrapies. The river's shallow waters provided a natural barrier, and the Persians assumed that the Macedonians would hesitate to attack. Alexander saw it differently. Hesitation was for the cautious, and boldness could yield not just victory, but legend. He personally led the cavalry charge across the river, a move that exemplified his leadership style. Soldiers saw their king at the front, spear in hand, shield raised, charging into the heart of enemy lines. His presence inspired courage, but it also carried immense risk. Alexander knew that a single misstep could shatter morale and turn the battle into a disaster. Every step he took was calculated, yet every movement carried the drama of life and death. The battle unfolded with intense ferocity. Persian cavalry attempted to flank the Macedonians, while Greek mercenaries held strong defensive positions. Alexander's companions and cavalry struck decisively, targeting key leaders and creating openings for the phalanx to advance. His strategy was simple yet brilliant. Disrupt command, exploit gaps, and maintain cohesion at all costs. Macedonian discipline, honed under years of training, proved superior to the less coordinated Persian forces. A defining moment came when Alexander personally engaged with Persian leaders. He was reportedly wounded in the thigh, but his presence and resilience inspired his troops to fight harder. Soldiers rallied around him, demonstrating a bond forged not just by obedience, but by admiration, trust, and shared ambition. The Persian satraps were killed or scattered, leaving their army disorganized and vulnerable. Alexander's decisiveness transformed potential chaos into opportunity, turning a difficult river crossing into a triumph. Victory at Granicus had profound implications. Militarily, it secured Alexander's foothold in Asia Minor and paved the way for subsequent campaigns deeper into Persian territory. Psychologically, it shattered the aura of invincibility surrounding Persian satraps and commanders. News of the Macedonian victory spread quickly, sowing fear among cities still loyal to Darius III and encouraging local populations to consider submission rather than resistance. Alexander's conduct after the battle also demonstrated his political acumen. He spared the cities that submitted voluntarily, rewarding cooperation and building local alliances. At the same time, he executed or punished those who resisted, sending a clear message that defiance would meet harsh consequences. This blend of clemency and ruthlessness created a reputation that combined fear and admiration, an essential tool for a commander operating thousands of miles from home in hostile lands. The Battle of Granicus also tested Alexander's ability to integrate diverse units and manage complex battlefield dynamics. His phalanx advanced in disciplined formations, while cavalry executed rapid flanking maneuvers. Coordination between infantry, cavalry, and companions was critical, and Alexander's command demonstrated both flexibility and precision. His understanding of terrain, timing, and troop psychology turned theoretical tactics into effective action. Strategically, Granicus established a pattern that would repeat throughout Alexander's campaigns: bold action, rapid exploitation of weaknesses, personal courage, and calculated risk. Alexander learned that leading from the front inspired extraordinary loyalty, while swift, decisive action could turn uncertainty into advantage. These lessons would guide him through sieges, pitched battles, and the treacherous political terrain of the Persian Empire. By the end of the battle, Alexander had achieved more than a tactical victory. He had solidified his reputation as a fearless leader capable of defeating an empire on its own soil. Soldiers, allies and adversaries recognized that Alexander was not merely a king or general. He was a force of destiny. Granicus was a preview of the audacity, strategy, and courage that would define his conquests for the next decade. In 332 BCE, Alexander faced one of the greatest challenges of his campaign, the island city of Tyre. Situated off the coast of modern-day Lebanon, Tyre was a heavily fortified city surrounded by the Mediterranean Sea and protected by walls that rose directly from the water. Its strategic location made it a crucial hub for trade, communication, and Persian influence. To Alexander, taking Tyre was essential not just for military reasons, but for psychological dominance, a demonstration that no fortress, no matter how seemingly impregnable, could withstand his ambition. The city's natural defenses were formidable. Tyre was connected to the mainland by only a narrow causeway, which the Persians reinforced with towers, catapults, and archers. Naval support further complicated the siege, as the Persian fleet could attack Macedonian forces from the water. Alexander's army, though seasoned and disciplined, had never faced such a challenge. Traditional siege tactics were insufficient, and failure was not an option. For Alexander, retreat was unthinkable. Victory would require innovation, determination, and ruthlessness. Alexander's response was audacious. He ordered the construction of a massive causeway, a land bridge stretching over half a kilometer from the mainland to the island city. Stones, timber, and earth were hauled by thousands of soldiers and laborers under enemy fire, a Herculean feat of engineering and determination. The causeway allowed siege towers and battering engines to approach the city walls, gradually eroding Tyre's defenses. Alexander demonstrated not only tactical brilliance, but also an unyielding commitment to overcoming obstacles, inspiring his troops to persevere under extreme conditions. The siege lasted 7 months, a test of endurance for both the Macedonian army and Alexander himself. Supplies ran low, morale wavered, and disease threatened the ranks. Yet, Alexander's presence on the front lines, coordinating assaults and encouraging his men, kept the army focused. He led attacks personally, demonstrating courage that inspired extraordinary loyalty. Every setback became an opportunity for ingenuity. Fire ships, siege towers, and naval assaults combined in a relentless campaign of pressure and attrition. Alexander's ruthlessness became apparent in the final stages. When Tyre refused surrender, he ordered a full-scale assault. Macedonian forces breached the walls, and the city was systematically destroyed. Tens of thousands of Tyrians were killed or enslaved, their homes burned, and their economy shattered. The destruction sent a stark message across the region. Resistance against Alexander would be met with total annihilation, while cooperation could bring protection and stability. This calculated mixture of terror and clemency became a hallmark of his campaigns. The conquest of Tyre had lasting strategic consequences. It secured the eastern Mediterranean coastline, neutralized Persian naval power in the region, and opened the way for campaigns deeper into Phoenicia, Egypt, and the heart of the Persian Empire. Alexander also integrated Tyrian resources into his supply lines, demonstrating an ability to convert victory into sustainable advantage. His campaigns were not merely destructive. They were designed to consolidate power, secure logistics, and prepare for further conquest. Tyre also highlighted Alexander's ability to combine military strategy with psychological warfare. The prolonged siege, the visible construction of the causeway, and the eventual brutal victory broadcast his power to surrounding cities and satraps. He became a figure whose reputation preceded him, causing cities to consider surrender rather than face the wrath he had unleashed at Tyre. Fear and respect worked hand in hand, amplifying the effectiveness of his army far beyond its numerical strength. The siege revealed another facet of Alexander's genius: adaptability. He encountered a situation where conventional tactics were impossible and responded with engineering, planning, and audacity. His ability to innovate under pressure became a defining trait of his leadership, allowing him to overcome obstacles that would have defeated less capable generals. Tyre was not merely a military objective, it was a test of intellect, perseverance, and the psychological dimensions of warfare. After the fall of Tyre, Alexander's momentum was unstoppable. His reputation as a master strategist, bold leader, and relentless conqueror spread across the eastern Mediterranean. The city's defeat demonstrated to friend and foe alike that Alexander would stop at nothing to achieve his objectives, and that no obstacle, geographical, tactical, or logistical, was insurmountable when faced with his vision and determination. The lessons of Tyre echoed throughout his campaigns. Boldness, innovation, and psychological motivation combined with personal courage and ruthlessness became the hallmarks of Alexander's approach. Tyre was more than a victory. It was a statement to the world that Alexander was not merely a king or general, but a force capable of reshaping the course of history through vision, action, and relentless ambition. In 332 BCE, after the grueling siege of Tyre, Alexander turned his sights southward toward Egypt, a land rich in resources, culture, and strategic significance. Unlike many of his previous conquests, Egypt offered little resistance. The Persian satraps, who had controlled the region, abandoned their posts, leaving Alexander to enter the Nile Delta with minimal opposition. Yet this conquest was not merely a military victory. It was a transformation of perception, politics, and legacy, cementing Alexander's status as a ruler with almost divine authority. Egypt had long been a land of deep religious traditions, with pharaohs regarded as living gods, intermediaries between humans and the divine. Alexander, astute as ever, understood that legitimacy required more than force, it required symbolism. He made his way to the ancient city of Memphis, where he was welcomed by priests and local elites, eager to secure favor with the new ruler. Alexander presented himself as a liberator from Persian rule, a figure of continuity and respect for Egyptian religion and customs. His approach was strategic. By honoring local beliefs, he strengthened loyalty and minimized unrest, ensuring that his control would be stable and enduring. One of the most iconic moments of Alexander's Egyptian campaign occurred at the oracle of the god Amun at the Siwa oasis in the Libyan desert. The journey itself was arduous, across deserts and harsh terrain, demonstrating Alexander's endurance and willingness to endure the same hardships as his soldiers. At the oasis, he was reportedly greeted by the oracle as the son of Amun, a declaration that intertwined his identity with divine authority. This event elevated Alexander's status from king to a semi-divine figure, a powerful psychological tool that he would use throughout his conquests to inspire loyalty and awe. Alexander's acceptance as a godlike figure was not mere vanity. It was a calculated political maneuver. In a land where the pharaoh had always been a divine intermediary, Alexander's recognition by the oracle allowed him to integrate himself into the religious and cultural fabric of Egypt. Temples welcomed him. Priests performed rituals in his honor, and Egyptians began to view him as a legitimate, even sacred ruler. This strategic blending of military conquest and religious symbolism showcased Alexander's unparalleled understanding of human psychology and governance. The foundation of Alexandria in 331 BCE further solidified his legacy in Egypt. Strategically located on the Mediterranean coast, the city was designed as a hub of commerce, culture, and administration. Alexander envisioned it as a bridge between East and West, a center for Greek culture and learning in the heart of Egypt. The city's design and rapid development reflected his foresight. He understood that empire was not merely won through battle, but through the creation of infrastructure, trade networks, and cultural institutions that would endure long after his campaigns. Egypt also provided critical logistical advantages. Its fertile Nile delta offered supplies for his advancing armies, while its ports facilitated naval dominance in the eastern Mediterranean. Control of Egypt allowed Alexander to secure his southern flank and focus on the Persian heartland, knowing that his rear would be stable and prosperous. His time in Egypt demonstrated that conquest was not only about defeating armies, but about creating sustainable governance and strategic depth. The fall of Egypt was also a moment of personal triumph for Alexander. Unlike previous battles, he faced minimal resistance, yet achieved maximum strategic and symbolic gain. By presenting himself as both conqueror and divine ruler, he expanded the perception of his power, blending awe, loyalty, and reverence. Soldiers and allies witnessed not only a king leading them, but a figure whose vision extended beyond military success into the realms of culture, religion, and empire building. Alexander's approach in Egypt contrasted with his earlier ruthless sieges. While he destroyed Tyre to send a message, he treated Egypt with respect, understanding that different contexts required different strategies. This ability to adapt, combining force, diplomacy, and symbolism, was a hallmark of his genius. He learned that power was most effectively consolidated when fear and respect were balanced with legitimacy and vision. By the time Alexander left Egypt, he had secured a key territory, established a new city that would become one of the greatest in the ancient world, and achieved a level of personal mythos that few rulers had ever experienced. His identification as the son of Amun, coupled with his strategic control over the Nile and Mediterranean, positioned him not just as a conqueror, but as a figure whose influence would shape culture, politics, and religion for centuries. The fall of Egypt demonstrated a critical lesson in leadership and empire building. Conquest alone is temporary, but integration, symbolism, and foresight create lasting power. Alexander combined military brilliance with cultural intelligence, turning a land of great history into a cornerstone of his expanding empire. In doing so, he not only secured resources and strategic advantages, but also elevated himself to a status that transcended mere kingship, setting the stage for the ultimate confrontation with Persia itself. In 331 BCE, Alexander faced the moment that would define his career and change the course of history, the Battle of Gaugamela. The Persian Empire, ruled by Darius III, was vast, wealthy, and militarily formidable. Darius had amassed a massive army, reportedly over 100,000 soldiers, including cavalry, infantry, and war chariots equipped with scythes. The odds seemed daunting, yet Alexander approached the battle with the confidence, strategy, and audacity that had carried him through countless campaigns. Victory was not just desirable, it was essential. Gaugamela, located near modern-day Mosul, in Iraq, was chosen by Darius as a battlefield that favored his larger forces. The terrain was flat and expansive, ideal for cavalry maneuvers and chariot attacks. Darius believed that the sheer size of his army would overwhelm Alexander's smaller force, estimated at around 47,000 Macedonians. But Alexander's genius lay in turning apparent disadvantage into opportunity. He relied on mobility, precision, and the psychological impact of leadership to offset numerical inferiority. Alexander's tactics at Gaugamela were revolutionary. He arranged his phalanx in a diagonal formation, creating both offense and flexibility. His cavalry, led by his elite companion cavalry, was positioned on the right flank, ready to exploit weaknesses and execute rapid strikes. Alexander himself led these cavalry units, placing himself at the center of action where his presence could inspire maximum morale and decisiveness. The Persian army, despite its size, struggled to maintain cohesion against the speed, discipline, and innovative strategies of the Macedonians. The battle began with Persian cavalry probing Alexander's flanks and scythed chariots charging into his lines. Alexander countered with disciplined phalanx formations and coordinated cavalry maneuvers, neutralizing the chariots and keeping the army organized under extreme pressure. He personally led charges at critical points, demonstrating courage that emboldened his soldiers. His leadership created a force multiplier. Troops fought not just out of duty, but out of loyalty and admiration for their king, willing to take risks they might have avoided under a less inspiring leader. A critical moment came when Alexander identified a gap in the Persian lines near Darius himself. He led a decisive cavalry charge directly at the Persian king, forcing Darius to flee the battlefield. The psychological impact was enormous. Persian morale collapsed almost instantly. Troops who had been confident in their superior numbers now saw their king retreating and began to break formation. Alexander's ability to combine tactical insight with psychological warfare turned a challenging battle into a crushing victory. The aftermath of Gaugamela was staggering. Persian forces were decimated, their leaders killed or captured, and the path to the heart of the empire, Babylon, Susa, and ultimately Persepolis, was open. Darius escaped initially, but his authority was effectively broken, and his empire fragmented under the pressure of Alexander's relentless advance. Gaugamela was not only a tactical triumph, but a symbolic one. It demonstrated that skill, audacity, and leadership could overcome overwhelming numerical odds. Alexander's conduct after the battle further solidified his reputation. He treated captured soldiers with a mix of mercy and pragmatism, integrating them into his forces when useful and punishing only those who resisted excessively. He understood that consolidation of power required both intimidation and the appearance of justice. His approach ensured that newly conquered territories would not rise in rebellion, and that local populations would see him as a legitimate ruler rather than a mere invader. The victory at Gaugamela also had profound personal significance for Alexander. It confirmed his ambition, validated his strategies, and cemented his place as the master of the known world. The Persian Empire, once thought invincible, had fallen before a man in his 20s, leading a disciplined, loyal army. Gaugamela showcased Alexander's combination of tactical brilliance, fearless leadership, and psychological insight, the traits that would carry him through India and beyond. Strategically, Gaugamela marked the effective end of Persian dominance. With the fall of the empire's core, Alexander could pursue Darius, secure cities, and incorporate Persian infrastructure, culture, and wealth into his growing empire. The victory also allowed Alexander to present himself not just as a conqueror, but as a liberator and successor to the Persian throne, blending military conquest with political legitimacy. The lessons of Gaugamela would resonate throughout history. Alexander demonstrated that victory was achieved not only through numbers and brute force, but through vision, strategy, decisiveness, and the ability to inspire loyalty. It was a template he would repeat in future campaigns, combining audacity with meticulous planning and personal courage. Gaugamela was more than a battle. It was a statement to the world that Alexander was unstoppable, destined to reshape the political, cultural, and military landscape of his era. After the decisive Macedonian victory at Gaugamela in 331 BCE, Alexander's focus shifted to the ultimate prize, Darius III, the Persian king who had fled the battlefield. The hunt for Darius was not simply a pursuit of a defeated enemy. It was a psychological and political campaign that would determine whether Alexander could claim the Persian Empire as his own. This phase of the conquest combined strategy, diplomacy, and cunning, revealing the depth of Alexander's ambition and his unrelenting drive for total domination. Darius had escaped the chaos at Gaugamela with a portion of his forces, fleeing east toward Ecbatana and then further into Media. He attempted to rally remaining satraps, rebuild his army, and recover control over the fracturing empire. However, the psychological blow of seeing Macedonian banners over the Persian heartlands had already shaken his authority. Governors and generals, who had once been loyal, now considered their options. The empire that had once seemed unassailable was vulnerable, and Alexander's reputation for both ruthless decisiveness and calculated clemency amplified the uncertainty. Alexander understood that capturing or eliminating Darius was crucial. Pursuit could not be haphazard. It required meticulous planning, knowledge of terrain, and careful management of supply lines over vast and unfamiliar territories. The Macedonian army was already fatigued from years of campaigns, yet Alexander's relentless energy kept the troops moving. His ability to inspire confidence in men who faced exhaustion, hunger, and uncertainty demonstrated a combination of charisma and discipline rare in military history. He led from the front, personally scouting routes, assessing enemy positions, and calculating the timing of each maneuver. During the pursuit, Alexander confronted not just the physical challenges of terrain, but also the political complexities of the Persian satrapies. Some regions offered submission, while others plotted resistance. Alexander combined diplomacy with coercion. Cities and governors who surrendered voluntarily were spared and integrated into his administration, while those that resisted faced destruction or enslavement. This strategy minimized unnecessary bloodshed, preserved resources, and demonstrated that Alexander's conquest was as much about governance as it was about war. Meanwhile, Darius's own position was precarious. Many of his satraps, sensing the inevitability of Macedonian victory, began to consider betrayal. One such figure, Bessus, the satrap of Bactria, conspired to seize power for himself, eventually capturing Darius in 330 BCE. This act of treachery would have a dramatic impact both on the Persian political landscape and on Alexander's own campaign. Darius, once the undisputed ruler of an empire, was now a prisoner of his own generals, while Alexander pressed forward with the determination of a man who viewed the world as conquerable by strategy and sheer will. When news of Darius's capture reached Alexander, he pursued the traitors with unrelenting speed. The Macedonian army crossed rivers, deserts, and mountain passes, navigating hostile terrain and local resistance with precision. Alexander's logistics, leadership, and ability to maintain morale under grueling conditions allowed him to close the distance between his forces and those holding Darius. He understood that the capture or rescue of the Persian king was not merely symbolic. It was essential to establishing legitimacy as the new ruler of Persia. The confrontation came in Bactria, where Alexander's forces intercepted Theseus and his co-conspirators. Theseus attempted to justify his betrayal as a patriotic act, claiming that Darius had failed his people and that he would protect the empire from further Macedonian aggression. Alexander's response was swift and calculated. Theseus was captured, tried according to both Macedonian and Persian codes, and executed. By punishing betrayal decisively, Alexander sent a message to the remaining satraps. Loyalty to him, not to Persia's fading monarchy, would determine survival and prosperity. Darius, meanwhile, had been treated with respect by Alexander's forces during his captivity. Historical accounts suggest that Alexander mourned the Persian king's death, which occurred shortly after his capture, possibly due to injuries sustained during his escape and mistreatment by his captors. Alexander's conduct was strategic as well as moral. By honoring Darius, he portrayed himself not merely as a conqueror, but as the legitimate successor to the Persian throne, a ruler capable of justice, magnanimity, and the unification of diverse peoples under his authority. The death of Darius marked the formal end of the Achaemenid Empire. What had once been a sprawling and powerful dominion now lay in Alexander's hands, fragmented and vulnerable. Yet Alexander's vision extended beyond mere conquest. He sought to integrate the empire into a single, functioning entity. He retained Persian administrative structures, adopted aspects of local governance, and sought to blend Greek and Persian cultures. This approach, often described as policy of fusion, demonstrated foresight. Empires are not held by force alone, but by the careful management of people, resources, and loyalty. Alexander's pursuit of Darius also highlighted the psychological dimensions of leadership. He understood the symbolic power of victory and legitimacy. By hunting down the fugitive king, he demonstrated to both allies and enemies that no obstacle, physical, political, or psychological, could thwart his ambition. Soldiers and local populations witnessed not just a military campaign, but a narrative of inevitability. The world's most powerful empire had fallen before Alexander, and his authority was now absolute. The campaign against Darius also reinforced Alexander's personal mythos. Tales of his bravery, endurance, and relentless pursuit circulated widely, enhancing his reputation across Persia, Greece, and beyond. His combination of courage, intelligence, and strategic ruthlessness created an aura that inspired loyalty and fear in equal measure. Even in death, Darius became a tool in Alexander's larger narrative. By treating the fallen king with honor, he elevated his own status as a ruler, destined to inherit and reshape the known world. By 330 BCE, Alexander had achieved what few thought possible. He had dismantled the Persian Empire, defeated its armies in decisive battles, captured and accounted for its king, and secured the loyalty of vast regions. Yet, this was not the culmination of his ambition. It was a stepping stone. The empire was vast and diverse, stretching from the Mediterranean to the Indus River, and Alexander now faced the challenge of unifying it, consolidating power, and continuing his march eastward toward lands unknown to the Greeks. The pursuit and death of Darius III underscore a key aspect of Alexander's genius. He combined military prowess with political insight, psychological acuity, and cultural intelligence. Conquest alone was insufficient. He understood that legitimacy, loyalty, and perception were as vital as swords and spears. His actions during this phase of the campaign transformed him from a conqueror into a ruler capable of inheriting the mantle of an empire and reshaping it according to his vision. Alexander's hunt for Darius and the subsequent fall of Persia were not merely military feats. They were a masterclass in strategy, leadership, and human psychology. By navigating betrayal, maintaining relentless pressure, and asserting both force and legitimacy, Alexander secured a foundation upon which he would continue his extraordinary journey, carrying the Macedonian banner across lands previously thought unconquerable. The death of the Persian king was both an end and a beginning. The end of an empire and the beginning of Alexander's transformation from king of Macedonia to ruler of the known world. By 327 BCE, after a decade of relentless conquest, Alexander the Great had not only toppled the Persian Empire, but also consolidated an empire stretching from Greece to the edge of modern-day Iran. Yet, for Alexander, the horizon always promised more. The Indus Valley, a land rich in resources, culture, and formidable armies, represented both a challenge and the next stage of his personal and historical ambition. Crossing into India would test not only his military genius, but also his endurance, adaptability, and ability to inspire loyalty among exhausted troops far from home. The journey into India began with meticulous planning. Alexander's army, now seasoned by years of campaigns across deserts, mountains, and river valleys, faced new terrain unlike anything they had previously encountered. The Indus region offered dense forests, treacherous rivers, and monsoon rains that turned the land into mud-choked quagmires. Logistics became a nightmare, supplying thousands of troops and hundreds of horses over hundreds of miles required extraordinary foresight. Yet Alexander thrived in these challenges. He personally scouted routes, coordinated supplies, and led his men through conditions that would have crushed ordinary armies. Alexander's entrance into India was met with immediate resistance from local rulers who were determined to defend their lands. Among the first significant confrontations was the Battle of the Hydaspes River in 326 BCE against King Porus, a warrior known for both his courage and his war elephants. Porus commanded a force that included thousands of infantry, cavalry, and the terrifying elephants that were unlike anything Macedonians had faced before. The battle was set near the riverbank, where Alexander faced the challenge of crossing under fire, coordinating a multi-pronged attack, and countering forces that were physically and psychologically daunting. The crossing of the Hydaspes River is remembered as one of Alexander's most brilliant tactical maneuvers. Under the cover of night, he secretly moved part of his army upstream, outflanking Porus and forcing the Indian king to fight on terrain of Alexander's choosing. This demonstrated a pattern seen throughout Alexander's campaigns: adaptability, foresight, and audacity. The Macedonians faced elephants, unfamiliar weapons, and monsoon-swollen rivers, yet discipline and innovative tactics turned what seemed an insurmountable obstacle into a decisive advantage. The battle itself was chaotic and brutal. Elephants charged the Macedonian phalanx, scattering formations and crushing infantry underfoot. Alexander, ever at the forefront, personally led cavalry attacks that targeted gaps in the Indian lines, turning the tide. The phalanx advanced with precision, using long sarissas to pierce both men and elephants, while archers and skirmishers harassed enemy flanks. The combination of strategy, personal leadership, and the morale of troops who had learned to trust their king under extreme danger resulted in a stunning victory. Pyrrhus was captured, but Alexander treated him with respect. Rather than executing or humiliating the defeated king, he reinstated Porus as a regional ruler under Macedonian suzerainty. This decision was both pragmatic and symbolic. It secured local cooperation, prevented unnecessary resistance, and demonstrated that Alexander's rule could combine authority with justice. It was a hallmark of his leadership style, balancing fear with respect, ruthlessness with diplomacy, and conquest with governance. Crossing into India also presented cultural and psychological challenges. Alexander's soldiers, exhausted by years of campaigning, faced unfamiliar languages, customs, and religions. Monsoon rains, tropical diseases, and long marches eroded morale. Mutiny became a very real threat, culminating in a critical moment near the Hyphasis River when his troops, weary and longing for home, refused to march further east. Here, Alexander faced one of his greatest leadership tests: how to maintain authority over men who had followed him across thousands of miles through countless battles, yet now questioned the feasibility of his ambition. Alexander responded with understanding and pragmatism. He respected his soldiers' limits and agreed to turn back, demonstrating that even the greatest conqueror needed to account for the human element. The decision marked the easternmost boundary of his empire, but did not diminish his achievements. The campaigns in India had extended Macedonian influence into territories previously untouched by Greek power, defeated powerful armies, and demonstrated Alexander's ability to adapt to unfamiliar challenges with both tactical brilliance and political insight. The Indian campaign also left a lasting legacy in terms of cultural integration. Alexander encouraged intermarriage between his troops and local populations, established cities as administrative and cultural centers, and adopted elements of local customs where strategically beneficial. This approach reflected a sophisticated understanding of empire building. Conquest was temporary without cultural integration, respect for local traditions, and the creation of lasting institutions. By the time Alexander left India, he had not only expanded his empire, but also transformed it into a multicultural, cross-continental dominion. His personal legend had grown immeasurably. Tales of his courage against war elephants, endurance through monsoon rivers, and respect for conquered kings circulated widely, inspiring awe across Asia and the Mediterranean. He had faced new worlds, unexpected challenges, and immense physical dangers, and emerged victorious, proving that his vision for conquest was as much about courage and strategy as it was about ambition. The crossing into India marked both a triumph and a turning point. It tested the limits of Alexander's ambition, his army's endurance, and his ability to govern diverse populations across vast territories. The victories, challenges, and negotiations of India cemented his reputation as the greatest military commander of his age, a ruler whose combination of audacity, intelligence, and adaptability reshaped the known world. Yet it also planted the seeds of reflection, fatigue, and human limitation, factors that would become increasingly significant as he prepared to return westward. By 325 BCE, after years of relentless campaigning and unimaginable victories across Persia and India, Alexander the Great faced a challenge unlike any battlefield: the limits of his army's endurance. His troops, who had followed him from the plains of Macedonia to the deserts of Persia and the rivers of the Indus, were exhausted, homesick, and demoralized. The men had witnessed victories, brutal sieges, foreign cultures, and staggering hardships. Now, at the Hyphasis River, they refused to march further east. This mutiny would force Alexander to confront one of the most difficult realities of leadership: Even the greatest ambition must contend with human limits. Alexander's reaction was a delicate balance of authority and pragmatism. Known for his audacity and unwillingness to accept defeat, he could have attempted to force his army onward through coercion or punishment. Yet he understood that the loyalty, morale, and lives of his soldiers were essential to the stability of his empire. After tense negotiations and appeals to shared glory, he ultimately conceded. The army turned west, beginning a long and challenging journey home. This decision highlights a crucial aspect of Alexander's leadership: strategic flexibility. Great leaders recognize when to push forward and when to preserve what has already been achieved. The return journey from India was far from easy. Alexander's army faced monsoon-soaked rivers, disease, and food shortages. The march through the Gedrosian desert in 325 BCE became legendary for its brutality. Hundreds of miles of arid terrain, scorching sun, and scarce water claimed thousands of lives. Alexander himself shared the hardships, walking alongside his soldiers, helping to motivate and sustain them. His leadership in these conditions reinforced loyalty and demonstrated that he did not demand sacrifices from his men that he was unwilling to share. Beyond physical hardship, Alexander had to address the political and administrative challenges of such an enormous empire. The territories he had conquered were culturally diverse, ethnically complex, and politically fragmented. From Greek city-states to Persian satrapies and Indian kingdoms, each region required careful management to prevent rebellion. Alexander used a combination of diplomacy, strategic marriages, and incorporation of local elites into his administration. This approach allowed him to maintain control over vast distances and diverse populations, while projecting the authority of a single, unified ruler. Along the return route, Alexander faced resistance from certain regions and tribes who had grown accustomed to the absence of centralized power. These minor rebellions required careful handling. Too harsh, and he would alienate populations. Too lenient, and disorder could spread. Alexander demonstrated his characteristic combination of ruthlessness and pragmatism. He punished leaders who defied him, but often co-opted or pardoned those willing to submit. This careful balance ensured that his path westward remained mostly secure, while also reinforcing the psychological impact of his authority. Alexander's journey home was also a period of reflection and cultural integration. He encouraged the establishment of Greek-style cities, spread Hellenistic culture, and promoted the fusion of Greek and Eastern traditions. Military colonies, educational institutions, and trade networks were developed to ensure that his conquests would not be fleeting. The return journey was not simply about survival or retreat. It was about consolidating power and creating the foundations for a lasting legacy. Despite these successes, Alexander faced growing internal tensions. The Macedonian nobility and generals, many of whom had served him faithfully for years, were increasingly concerned about his adoption of Persian customs and the integration of Eastern soldiers into his army. Alexander had encouraged intermarriages and often adopted Persian dress and court rituals. These changes, while politically astute for managing conquered lands, caused friction with traditional Macedonian elites, foreshadowing the challenges of maintaining cohesion within a sprawling, multicultural empire. By the time Alexander reached Babylon in 324 BCE, the empire stretched from Greece to the Indus River. The army had survived extreme physical trials, maintained discipline, and remained loyal despite fatigue and cultural tensions. Alexander's ability to navigate mutiny, hardship, and political complexity demonstrated that conquest was only part of leadership. Maintaining an empire required vision, adaptability, and psychological insight. He had achieved what few thought possible: a unified dominion across 3 continents under a single authority. The return from India also marked a transformation in Alexander himself. Years of campaigning, constant decision-making, and exposure to diverse cultures had honed his abilities as both a military commander and a ruler. He was no longer merely the young king of Macedonia. He had become a legendary figure whose authority was recognized by subjects across continents. His ambition had expanded beyond territorial conquest to the creation of a cohesive empire, blending Greek, Persian, and Indian elements in governance, culture, and military organization. Yet the campaign highlighted the human cost of such ambition. Thousands of soldiers had perished, entire regions had been devastated, and the psychological burden of constant warfare weighed heavily on Alexander and his generals. His triumphs were built on sacrifice, courage, and relentless ambition, and the balance between consolidation and overextension became a key consideration for the remaining years of his life. The journey west from India thus represents both a physical and symbolic turning point. Alexander had tested the limits of geography, endurance, and human loyalty. He had confronted new cultures, unfamiliar terrain, and unprecedented logistical challenges. And he had done so while maintaining authority, inspiring awe, and securing the foundation for an empire that, though vast and diverse, was remarkably stable under his vision. By the end of this grueling expedition, Alexander had proven that leadership requires not only military genius, but also empathy, flexibility, and the ability to make hard choices in the face of human limitations. His decision to turn back from the Hephaestus River, endure the horrors of the Gedrosian desert, and maintain cohesion among his diverse and exhausted army exemplifies the combination of courage, strategy, and wisdom that would define his legacy. Alexander the Great was not just a conqueror of lands, he was an architect of civilization. One of the most enduring aspects of his legacy lies in the cities he founded, the most famous of which was Alexandria in Egypt, established in 331 BCE. These cities were far more than military outposts. They were instruments of culture, administration, trade, and integration. Through them, Alexander ensured that his influence would persist long after his death, shaping the political and cultural landscape of the ancient world. Alexandria was strategically located on the Mediterranean coast, near the Nile Delta, at the confluence of trade routes connecting Africa, Asia, and Europe. Alexander envisioned it as a hub of commerce, learning, and administration. The city was designed to be both practical and symbolic, a center of governance, a beacon of Greek culture, and a gateway to the wealth and resources of Egypt and beyond. Its harbors facilitated trade with distant regions, while its urban planning reflected the ideals of Hellenistic architecture, grid-like streets, grand public spaces, and monumental buildings. The city quickly became a melting pot of cultures. Greeks, Egyptians, Jews, and merchants from distant lands settled in Alexandria, creating a cosmopolitan environment that fostered exchange of ideas, languages, and traditions. Alexander encouraged this blending, recognizing that cultural integration was key to political stability. By establishing cities like Alexandria, he created nodes of Hellenistic influence across his empire, spreading Greek language, art, science, and philosophy to regions that had previously been isolated from these ideas. Alexander founded dozens of cities during his campaigns, each serving multiple purposes. Military garrisons ensured control over newly conquered territories, administrative centers helped manage resources and taxation, and commercial hubs facilitated trade. Cities such as Alexandria Escati in Central Asia extended Greek influence deep into the heart of the former Persian Empire, blending local customs with Hellenistic governance. These foundations created a network that bound his empire together and promoted cultural exchange, even in regions geographically and culturally distant from Macedonia. The strategic placement of cities also allowed Alexander to consolidate power and integrate diverse populations. Local elites were often incorporated into city administration, while Greek settlers provided loyal support. This policy encouraged cooperation rather than rebellion, turning former adversaries into contributors to the new order. By embedding Greek culture alongside local traditions, Alexander laid the foundation for the Hellenistic civilization, a fusion of Greek and Eastern cultures that would dominate the Mediterranean and Near East for centuries. Alexandria itself became the jewel of this network. Its library, later renowned as one of the greatest repositories of knowledge in the ancient world, symbolized Alexander's vision for a lasting intellectual legacy. The city attracted scholars, scientists, philosophers, and artists, becoming a center of learning and innovation. The lighthouse, the Pharos, became one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, demonstrating Alexander's commitment not only to utility but also to grandeur, symbolism, and the projection of power through architecture. The cities also served military purposes. Garrisons ensured Macedonian dominance, providing bases from which to respond to uprisings or external threats. Roads, ports, and infrastructure facilitated rapid movement of troops and supplies, enhancing logistical capabilities that had been critical throughout Alexander's campaigns. In this sense, city building was an extension of his military strategy, combining defense, administration, and cultural projection into a single powerful tool of governance. Alexander's vision of urban development reflected his understanding of history. He recognized that empires endure not through conquest alone, but through institutions, culture, and connectivity. Cities were centers of administration, hubs of trade, and symbols of power that conveyed the legitimacy of his rule. They ensured that his influence would persist even after he left or died, embedding Hellenistic culture into the DNA of the regions he conquered. Beyond practical and administrative functions, these cities also reinforced Alexander's personal legacy. By naming them after himself, he created a permanent imprint on the map of the ancient world. Alexandria in Egypt, Alexandria Eskoti in modern Tajikistan, and dozens of others immortalized his name, ensuring that generations would remember the man who not only conquered lands, but also reshaped the cultural and political geography of his era. The spread of Hellenistic culture through these cities had profound implications. Greek language, art, philosophy, and science merged with local traditions, creating a hybrid civilization that influenced politics, education, architecture, and commerce for centuries. Trade networks expanded, intellectual exchange flourished, and cities became centers of innovation, spreading ideas from the Mediterranean to Central Asia. This legacy would endure long after Alexander's death in 323 BCE, influencing empires such as the Seleucid, Ptolemaic, and beyond. Alexander's city building demonstrates a crucial aspect of his genius. He understood that conquest without consolidation was fleeting. His armies could seize territories, but only through culture, infrastructure, and governance could he ensure that his empire would endure. By founding cities, promoting integration, and fostering learning, he transformed military victories into lasting institutions, creating the foundation of the Hellenistic world that shaped history long after his death. By 323 BCE, Alexander the Great had achieved what few in human history could imagine. He had conquered the Persian Empire, crossed into India, and returned with an army that had endured unimaginable hardships. Yet, even at the height of his power, his ambitions remained boundless. Plans were underway for new campaigns: Arabia, the unknown reaches of Africa, and further consolidation of his empire. Alexander's vision was global, but fate had other plans, and his extraordinary life would soon come to a sudden, tragic end. After the return from India, Alexander spent time consolidating his empire. He held councils in Babylon, managing the integration of Greek, Persian, and Indian territories. He continued to promote cultural fusion, encouraging marriages between his Macedonian soldiers and local women, establishing administrative systems that combined Greek and Eastern practices, and founding cities to solidify control. His goal was not merely to hold power, but to create an enduring empire that transcended cultural and geographic boundaries. However, the years of constant warfare, the grueling marches across deserts, rivers, and mountains, and the relentless stress of leadership had taken a toll. Alexander was no longer the invincible, tireless warrior of his youth. Physical exhaustion, battle wounds, and exposure to harsh climates had weakened his body, though his mind remained sharp and his ambition undiminished. He was aware of the fragility of life, but his focus remained on the endless possibilities of conquest and legacy. In the spring of 323 BCE, while in Babylon, Alexander fell seriously ill. Historical accounts vary regarding the cause of his illness, with theories ranging from malaria, typhoid fever, or other infectious diseases, to complications from old battle wounds and exhaustion. Despite the efforts of his physicians, Alexander's condition deteriorated rapidly. The man who had endured storms, deserts, and rivers now faced a foe he could not outmaneuver or command: his own failing health. During his final days, Alexander continued to exhibit the traits that had defined his life. He held councils, made administrative decisions, and even discussed future campaigns. His mind remained focused on empire, reflecting his unwavering dedication and relentless ambition. Witnesses reported that he expressed concern for the succession of his empire, asking who would inherit the dominion he had built. His death, at just 32 years old, left the greatest empire the world had ever seen in a state of uncertainty. Alexander's death in June 323 BCE shocked the known world. Generals, soldiers, and populations across 3 continents mourned the loss of a man who had reshaped their destinies. His body was preserved in a golden sarcophagus, later transported to Alexandria, where it became an object of reverence and symbol of his enduring legacy. Yet the empire he had built, immense and diverse, lacked a clear successor, setting the stage for decades of conflict among his generals, known as the Diadochi. Despite his early death, Alexander's achievements were extraordinary. In a career spanning just over a decade, he had conquered territories stretching from Greece to the Indus River, defeating armies far larger than his own, and overcoming challenges that would have crushed any ordinary leader. His ability to inspire loyalty, innovate tactics, and integrate diverse cultures transformed the nature of empire and warfare. He created a world where ideas, art, commerce, and governance flowed across continents in ways previously unimaginable. Alexander's final campaigns, though cut short, demonstrated his unrelenting drive. Even in declining health, he remained focused on expansion, consolidation, and the projection of power. His ambitions were not limited by geography, culture, or opposition. They were boundless. Yet his untimely death underscored the fragility of human life, reminding the world that even the greatest conquerors are mortal. The impact of his death was immediate and far-reaching. Without a clear heir, the unity of his empire dissolved into rivalry among generals, each seeking control of different regions. Macedonia, Persia, Egypt, and Central Asia were divided, giving rise to the Hellenistic kingdoms. While his empire fractured politically, the cultural and intellectual foundations he had laid continued to thrive, spreading Greek influence across continents and leaving a legacy that endured for centuries. Alexander's final illness and death also offer profound lessons in leadership and human ambition. Even the most extraordinary vision must contend with limits, physical, logistical, and temporal. Alexander achieved more than anyone could have imagined, yet he was still bound by mortality. His life illustrates the duality of greatness, immense power and accomplishment coexisting with human vulnerability. Ultimately, Alexander's final days were a testament to his character. Even facing death, he remained strategic, thoughtful, and concerned with the fate of his empire. His life, marked by extraordinary achievements and relentless ambition, left an indelible mark on history. Alexander the Great did not merely conquer lands, he reshaped the world, created enduring cultural legacies, and inspired generations to come with the sheer magnitude of his vision and the audacity of his actions. The death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE left a power vacuum that would plunge his vast empire into a period of uncertainty and conflict. Without a clear heir of age and authority, the territories he had conquered from Greece to the Indus River became the battleground for his generals, known as the Diadochi. These men, Ptolemy, Seleucus, Antigonus, Cassander, and others, were not mere lieutenants. They were ambitious leaders who had fought alongside Alexander, each with the capability and desire to claim a portion of the empire. The struggle among them would shape the political, cultural, and military landscape of the ancient world for decades. The initial months following Alexander's death were marked by confusion and tentative agreements. His half-brother Aridaeus, mentally unfit to rule, was proclaimed King Philip III, while his infant son Alexander IV was declared co-ruler. These nominal titles masked the real power struggle. The empire was effectively leaderless, and the Diadochi began to assert authority in their respective regions. Ptolemy seized Egypt. Seleucus established control over Babylon and the eastern territories, and Antigonus attempted to dominate Asia Minor and Syria. The unity Alexander had imposed through personal leadership quickly unraveled. The fragmentation of the empire was violent and protracted. Alliances formed and dissolved, betrayals were common, and battles erupted across multiple continents. Cities changed hands repeatedly, and territories that had once submitted peacefully under Alexander now became fiercely contested. The wars of the Diadochi lasted for decades, illustrating a fundamental truth. The cohesion of Alexander's empire depended entirely on his leadership. Without him, even the most loyal and disciplined generals could not maintain the same unity. Yet amid the chaos, Alexander's cultural and administrative policies endured. His strategy of integrating conquered peoples, blending Greek and local customs, and founding cities with Hellenistic governance created enduring structures that outlasted political upheaval. For example, Ptolemy in Egypt maintained and expanded Alexandria as a center of learning, trade, and culture. Seleucus in Babylon ensured that Greek administrative systems continued to function while adapting to local traditions. In these ways, Alexander's vision persisted even as the political unity of his empire collapsed. The Diadochi also spread Hellenistic culture far beyond the borders Alexander had personally conquered. Greek became the lingua franca in many regions, facilitating communication, trade, and governance. Hellenistic art, architecture, and philosophy blended with local traditions, creating unique cultural syntheses in Egypt, Syria, Mesopotamia, and Central Asia. The cities Alexander had founded became incubators for this fusion, preserving his influence even as political boundaries shifted. Military innovation and strategy continued to evolve under the Diadochi. The Macedonian phalanx, siege techniques and cavalry tactics pioneered by Alexander were adapted and refined in the ensuing conflicts. While none of his successors matched his audacity or personal genius, they inherited his methods and continued to project Greek military power across the Near East. Battles like Ipsus in 301 BCE demonstrated how Alexander's tactical innovations shaped warfare long after his death. The fragmentation also had profound social and economic consequences. Trade networks expanded as new rulers sought to connect their territories with markets across the Mediterranean and Asia. Cultural exchange accelerated, particularly in the eastern regions, where Greek settlers, local populations, and incoming merchants interacted. This period of Hellenistic influence laid the groundwork for advancements in science, philosophy, and urban development, leaving a legacy that persisted long after the Diadochi themselves had passed. Alexander's empire, though politically divided, became a framework for future civilizations. The Hellenistic kingdoms, Ptolemaic Egypt, Seleucid Asia, and Antigonid Macedonia, acted as conduits for Greek culture, philosophy, and governance. Centers of learning like the Library of Alexandria preserved knowledge, while cities, founded by Alexander, served as hubs for administration, commerce, and innovation. His vision of cultural integration survived, demonstrating that empire building was as much about ideas and institutions as it was about military conquest. The wars of the Diadochi also revealed the human dimensions of ambition and rivalry. Former comrades became bitter enemies, alliances were fragile, and the pursuit of power often outweighed loyalty or principle. Yet even in this chaos, Alexander's strategies, policies, and cultural imprint endured. His influence guided the formation of these kingdoms, the spread of Hellenistic civilization, and the evolution of political structures across 3 continents. Ultimately, the period of the Diadochi exemplifies the paradox of Alexander's legacy. His empire could not survive intact without his personal leadership, yet the systems, cities, and culture he had established endured for centuries. The spread of Hellenistic culture, the continuation of Greek-style governance, and the adaptation of his military innovations all attest to his enduring impact. Alexander may have died young, but the ripples of his ambition reshaped the world, influencing societies, empires, and cultures far beyond his lifetime. Alexander the Great's life ended abruptly in 323 BCE, yet his influence resonates through history, myth, and the very foundations of Western civilization. In just 13 years of relentless conquest, he transformed the known world, blending cultures, founding cities, and creating an empire that stretched from Greece to India. His story is a fusion of history and legend, where the deeds of a mortal man became inseparable from the mythos that surrounds him, shaping the political, cultural, and intellectual development of societies for centuries. One of the most visible legacies of Alexander is the spread of Hellenistic culture. The cities he founded, Alexandria in Egypt, Alexandria Iskut in Central Asia, and dozens more, served as centers of Greek language, art, philosophy, and science. These cities became incubators for knowledge, trade, and cultural synthesis, where Greek and local traditions merged to create a cosmopolitan world that influenced law, architecture, education, and governance. The Hellenistic period that followed his conquests was marked by remarkable intellectual achievements, from advances in astronomy and mathematics to the flourishing of philosophy and literature. Alexander's military innovations also left an indelible mark. His use of the phalanx, coordinated cavalry maneuvers, and strategic siege techniques influenced warfare for centuries. Military leaders across the Mediterranean, the Near East, and even Rome studied and adapted his tactics, integrating them into campaigns that would shape empires long after his death. His combination of audacity, precision, and psychological insight demonstrated that leadership in war requires more than sheer numbers. It requires vision, timing, and the ability to inspire loyalty among troops. Politically, Alexander's empire became a model for integration and administration. While his empire fractured after his death, the administrative systems he established in Persia, Egypt, and Asia provided templates for governance. Local elites were incorporated into the administration, cultural practices were respected, and trade networks were maintained and expanded. These policies enabled Greek influence to permeate distant regions while simultaneously respecting and utilizing local structures, a principle of cultural diplomacy that would echo in the governance of future empires. Alexander's personal mythos also shaped how subsequent generations viewed leadership, ambition, and destiny. Stories of his courage, strategic brilliance, and near-divine status inspired rulers, generals, and philosophers alike. He became a symbol of ultimate ambition, a man who dared to unite the world under his vision, crossing deserts, rivers, and mountains in pursuit of a dream that exceeded any ordinary human goal. His life demonstrated both the heights of achievement possible through vision and courage, and the human costs of relentless ambition. The blending of history and legend is also reflected in literature and art. Alexander's life inspired epic poetry, historical chronicles, and artistic representations from antiquity to the Renaissance. His campaigns, battles, and personal encounters became archetypes of heroism, strategy, and charisma. Artists depicted him in heroic poses, often with divine associations, reinforcing the perception of Alexander not only as a historical figure, but as a timeless icon of conquest and leadership. The influence of Alexander's conquests also reshaped the geopolitics of the ancient world. By dismantling the Persian Empire, he created a power vacuum that led to the rise of the Hellenistic kingdoms, which in turn influenced the development of Rome, Egypt, and the Near East. Trade routes expanded, ideas flowed across continents, and cultures that had been isolated for centuries encountered one another in ways that facilitated innovation, exchange, and hybridization. His campaigns set the stage for centuries of cross-cultural interaction, laying the groundwork for a more interconnected world. Beyond culture and politics, Alexander's legacy is philosophical and symbolic. He demonstrated the possibilities of human ambition, resilience, and vision. His life exemplifies the notion that leadership is not just about power, but about the ability to inspire, to imagine a world beyond what exists, and to mobilize others to pursue that vision. At the same time, his death reminds us of human limitation, mortality, and the fragile nature of even the greatest achievements. This duality, immense accomplishment paired with human vulnerability, ensures that his story continues to captivate and instruct. Even today, Alexander the Great is a benchmark against which military leaders, politicians, and visionaries measure ambition and leadership. Schools of strategy study his battles, historians examine his political integration techniques, and cities founded under his influence continue to thrive as centers of culture, commerce, and learning. Alexandria in Egypt remains a living testament to his vision, while the broader Hellenistic world continues to shape art, architecture, and philosophy in regions far beyond Greece. In the end, Alexander's greatness lies not only in the territories he conquered, but in the ideas, institutions, and cultural connections he established. He reshaped the known world, blending East and West in ways that would influence civilizations for millennia. His story is a testament to the power of vision, courage, and leadership, but also a reminder of the human costs and limitations inherent in the pursuit of greatness. Alexander the Great remains more than a historical figure. He is a symbol, a legend, and a foundation of Western civilization. From the deserts of Persia to the rivers of India. His life and actions set the stage for cultural exchange, political innovation, and military strategy that continues to resonate. Through the cities he founded, the cultures he fused, and the myths that grew around his persona, Alexander shaped the trajectory of the ancient world and left a legacy that endures in history, art, and collective memory. His life reminds us that ambition knows no bounds, that leadership requires vision and courage, and that the impact of one determined individual can ripple through centuries, shaping societies, ideas, and the very course of human civilization. Alexander the Great conquered not just lands, but the imagination of the world, leaving an enduring imprint that continues to inspire awe and reflection over 2,000 years after his death. Don't just watch history, experience it. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to join us on a journey through the greatest empires, legendary battles, and untold stories that shaped our world. Dive into the epic saga of Alexander the Great and witness how one man's ambition changed history forever. Subscribe now and be part of the adventure.